Australia.
Anzac Day with a difference. Coronavirus restrictions mean Australians are kept away from large ceremonies.
And so our remembrances today, small, quiet and homely, will be.
People turn out regardless, holding their own events at home. The only Australians allowed to gather for Anzac Day, with Antarctica not subject to virus restrictions. Another grim milestone, the COVID-19 death toll goes beyond 50,000 in the United States. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Miriam Corowa. People are commemorating Anzac Day at home today, with public services and marches cancelled due to coronavirus restrictions. It's the first time since 1919 that Anzac Day commemorations have been disrupted, but Australians have found other ways to remember the Anzacs. The National Commemorative Service was held in Canberra with only a few dignitaries and veterans in attendance. And this morning, the RSL encouraged people to light up the dawn at home. Well, we're now going to join our reporters around the country and go first to Tom Lowry, who is in Canberra at the Australian War Memorial. We also have Rani Hayman, who is at the Anzac Memorial in Hyde Park in Sydney, and Elias Klur is at the Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne. So, Tom, first to you. Thousands of people, normally they'd be visiting Canberra for Anzac Day, but a very different scene there this morning.
That's certainly the case, Miriam. Where I am now on Anzac Parade in Canberra would normally be bustling around about this time of day. It would have been busy right from the dawn service in the morning through to the march around mid-morning, right through till now. Ordinarily, we'd see about 35,000 people come together for the dawn service for what is a really special occasion, gathering in the absolute darkness and absolute stillness of a Canberra morning on Anzac Day to pay their respects. But instead, we saw a much smaller, much more intimate service, only attended by the most senior Australian dignitaries this morning, held within the Australian War Memorial itself. People like the Prime Minister, the Opposition Leader and the Governor-General all laying wreaths. Now, the context of today wasn't ignored during the service. Many pointed out that the Anzac Day values that are marked on this day, things like unity and coming together to achieve a common goal, can really be applied in the current pandemic circumstance. And the Prime Minister in his address also pointed out that this isn't the first time that Anzac Day has been marked during a pandemic, referencing 1919, when Australia was affected by the Spanish flu just after the end of World War I, and also pointing to a very small Anzac Day commemoration held on the beaches at Gallipoli back in 1919, and wondering what Australians might learn from that can be applied to today.
There was no pomp at that little service. There were no dignitaries, no bands, just the sound of lapping water on a lonely shore. One said of that little service, it was the real thing. And so our remembrances today, small, quiet and homely, will be.
And Tom, some are wondering if this unusual Anzac Day might in fact create some traditions of its own.
Yeah, historians have pointed out that Anzac Day has always evolved with time. At times it's been a very small commemoration. In more recent years it's been a very large occasion, and they're wondering if Anzac Day might change with the circumstance. Obviously today has forced people to innovate. They've been doing things like holding a candle in their driveway at dawn to sort of pay their own personal respects. And historian at the Australian War Memorial, Dr. Carl James, is wondering if a new tradition might be created here that people will hang on to long after this pandemic is over.
While we can't, be together as a group, people are sharing their experiences digitally. And it may well be that people into the future, say from 2021, rather than come to, say, the memorial or elsewhere, will want to stay at home. They will leave a candle and they'll continue on some of those traditions, or they'll create new traditions and continue on some of the practices that we saw this Anzac Day.
Certainly a day with a difference. Let's now go to Rani Hayman in Sydney. And Rani, the Anzac Day service has wrapped up in Sydney. What was happening there?
That's right. The service here at Anzac Memorial in Hyde Park in Sydney CBD has wrapped up. There was a number of dignitaries who were attending the service this morning. We heard from the New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian. We also heard from the New South Wales RSL Acting President Ray James, and we also heard from Her Excellency the Honourable Margaret Beasley, the Governor of New South Wales, and she spoke about how the Anzac spirit can be utilised through this difficult time as we're dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. We spoke to her just after the service, and here's what she had to say.
When you think of, that real Anzac spirit, it means a lot. There are expressions in which it's summed up, expressions of courage, of mateship, endurance, humour, ingenuity. So what is it that we're having to do now in a time where it's not a wartime, but it's a very difficult time?
And Rani, how would you describe the mood there outside the Anzac Memorial during the service?
So it was pretty emotional outside the service today. There was a small number of mainly veterans who were standing outside the memorial. Most of them were sitting quietly on benches or standing while they were watching the service on their phones. We spoke to a number of them, but we spoke to one in particular. His name was Wayne Habenar. He's the president of the Commando Association of New South Wales, and he spoke about the resilience that he's feeling amongst the community during this time.
Not being able to march today was devastating to my people, and they were lost. They felt lost this year. They did what they could. They're resilient, they're strong, and they still feel lost in what was happening.
Now we'll go to our reporter Elias Klur at the Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne. So Elias, what's happening there at the shrine now?
Yeah, good afternoon, Miriam. Well, the feeling here, it's kind of hard to describe, almost quite strange. Usually at this time we would have seen an Anzac Day parade procession come and go, and there'd be thousands of people mingling around this area, but currently on the forecourt there's a few people. It's kind of gone in ebbs and flows. There has been crowds of a number of people here today, it must be said. Now there was a more traditional ceremony behind closed doors at the shrine behind me, but if you were mingling around at that time at the crack of dawn, you probably wouldn't have known that anything was going on inside. That's, I guess, shows how low-key this event was. There was about 30 people here for the dawn service. They were walking around and stopped here to pay their respects. I should also mention there were some protesters here as well, calling themselves the Hardcore Australians, protesting that the flag at half-mast here was indeed the wrong one. The Anzacs fought under a different one. So police were here to disperse that crowd. But to be honest with you, Miriam, there has been quite a few people come through here, many of them just completing their exercise and stopping here for a moment or two to pay their respects.
Well, not everyone gets the opportunities, and not everyone gets a beautiful family with such proud parents, and having Dad here with us and being able to take us through this is just amazing.
So still quite an emotional and significant day. And Elias, how have people across Melbourne been commemorating the day, given that they haven't been able to attend those traditional ceremonies?
That's right, Miriam, and we've been hearing a lot about people lining up the dawn, coming up with innovative makeshift ways of commemorating Anzac Day. And this morning we were at a street in Malvern, in Melbourne's east, and we saw quite an extraordinary and solemn dawn service on a street where 83-year-old Graham Conroy performed the last post on his trombone to an audience of about 30 people who all came to their front lawns holding candles and observing a moment's silence or a minute's silence. It was quite something to see, made even more poignant by the fact that just across the road from where Graham lives is an aged care facility, which was one of the first to go into voluntary lockdown due to the coronavirus outbreak. Graham Conroy has performed at 30 Anzac Day parades. Today's Anzac Day was, of course, very different. I spoke to him about that a short time ago.
Look, I've been doing just Anzac things in bands for about 30 years. So you always feel special. I don't know how to explain that, but you always feel special. You're marching up St Kilda Road and up to the shrine and things like that. So I've done it for years, but I don't do it anymore, naturally enough. But it is special.
Incredibly powerful moments of unity, even with the nation in isolation. Our reporters Tom Lowry in Canberra, Ronnie Hayman in Sydney and Elias Klur in Melbourne. Well, Anzac Day presents an opportunity to pause and reflect. It's also a chance to support veterans. Reporter Siobhan Hinyu is in Townsville in Queensland. She joins us now live. Siobhan, Townsville, of course, has a very strong military history and ongoing presence. What's been done there for veterans?
G'day Miriam, that's right. Townsville is Australia's biggest garrison city. 3rd Brigade is based up here at Laverack Barracks, so about 4,000 odd serving soldiers, and of course that huge veteran community too. From Vietnam all the way through to Iraq, Afghanistan, East Timor, and all the defence families. So this is usually a huge day of year here, and without the parades through the main streets and all the ceremonies that you usually see at dawn at the cenotaph behind me and the rest, people have had to be a little bit inventive, and some of the diggers out at the 3rd Battalion Royal Australian Regiment at the barracks had come up with an idea to connect with veterans who might need a little bit of reaching out, a little bit of connection in the lead up to Anzac Day. So they all took to their mobile phones and socially distanced, of course. They called several hundred veterans from all those conflicts, different ages, different generations, just kind of saying hello, how you going, checking in on perhaps people that they'd never talked to before. But the idea is to really ease that sense of isolation that veterans can be susceptible to around Anzac Day, and to remind them that while they might be marking the day alone, they're certainly not forgotten. Now, Bob Dabinet is the president of the 3RAR Association. And it was interesting, he said that while the whole project was aimed at the diggers providing support and confidence to the veterans, sometimes it worked the other way around. Have a listen.
They get to identify where they themselves fit in the hierarchy of being a veteran and a member of the veteran community. Every soldier wants to identify that they are good enough, fit the bill. And I've got to tell you, from my experience of over 36 years in the military, they do.
How are people in general marking Anzac Day there in Townsville?
Well, there's been a steady stream of people to the cenotaph from dawn onwards today. Very respectful, quiet. People are kind of dedicating wreaths. I've seen some hand-painted stones and things like that. So very much a sense of reverence, a little bit of kind of added solemnity and perhaps sadness that people haven't been able to gather shoulder to shoulder. The other interesting thing that's happening in town is that one of Australia's biggest warships, the HMAS Adelaide, has docked here at the moment. So a lot of sailors and some soldiers as well, they would usually have shore leave and they'd usually be marking Anzac Day here as well. But because of coronavirus fears, that ship is currently exercising up and down off the Queensland coast, and so all those soldiers and sailors have been told they have to stay on the ship. No one's allowed on or off while they're here. And so that's yet another impact of this coronavirus, preventing people from all levels of society, connected to defence or not, from doing what we usually do on Anzac Day.
Certainly a day with a difference, but still as moving as always. Our reporter Siobhan Hinyu there at Townsville in Queensland. There's been a 10th coronavirus death in Tasmania. A 90-year-old man from the state's northwest died yesterday. Let's go to reporter Selena Ross in Hobart now. So Selena, 9 out of 10 Tasmanian COVID-19 deaths have been people from the northwest of the state.
Yeah, so this has unfortunately been another death of a person related to the outbreak in the northwest of Tasmania around the Burnie region. So this man was a 90-year-old man and he was being treated at the Mersey Community Hospital in Latrobe. The Premier has spoken to us earlier and he's expressed his condolences about the death.
On behalf of the Tasmanian Government, I'd like to extend my condolences and deep sorrow to the family of the 10th victim to coronavirus, a 90-year-old man who was being cared for on the northwest coast. From myself personally, from the government and from the people of Tasmania, we're so very sorry for your loss.
And Selena, how has Tasmania commemorated Anzac Day?
So we've seen some really lovely photos on social media from right around the state today of people standing outside their homes with a light and a candle to commemorate the Tasmanians who've served. And the Premier has laid wreaths both at Government House this morning and then here at Anglesey Barracks just a short time ago with the RSL President Robert Dick and the Veteran Affairs Minister Guy Barnett. They had a very short service, but it was very touching nonetheless, and really sent that message home that even though things are looking very different this year, that still we are remembering the people who have served.
Our reporter Selena Ross there in Hobart. Well, as dawn broke this morning, many Australians found their own way to commemorate Anzac Day without traditional services. The coronavirus restrictions have forced the cancellation of public events. Let's speak now to Professor Joy Demusi, who is the Director of the Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences at the Australian Catholic University. Welcome to ABC News. Professor Demusi, of course, today an Anzac Day with quite a significant difference, the absence of those traditional marches and the dawn services. How do you think that veterans and, of course, their families will be feeling in the wake of this?
Well, thanks, Miriam. Yes, it's a remarkable change, isn't it, and a difference from previous practices. We've seen an extraordinary movement emerge in the driveways of people's suburban homes. I think it's a very poignant and very moving and powerful moment and day. I don't think that's been lost. And in fact, in the way that this movement has led to the raw symbols that we see, the draping of the flag, the candles, the wreaths, the 1 minute silence, the last post. I mean, Anzac Day has been stripped back to those raw symbols, and there's not much else around at the moment. Now, I think, as many commentators have said, this is still a very poignant and powerful moment of commemoration. It's just a very different one. So I don't think the emotion's been lost.
And would it be fair to say that this provides an opportunity for deeper reflection, perhaps a sense of unity in isolation, which of course continues across the nation?
Well, I think so, Miriam. I think it's led to something a lot more contemplative, a lot more reflective about the impact of war on men and women, on their families, and what war has meant for this country. I think away from the distractions that has often cluttered Anzac Day, if you like, this focus on individual reflection and collective reflection in the context of social distancing, I'm hoping has led to something more contemplative.
And do you think that for people who are drawing on their own resources, their own initiative to mark Anzac Day, that this gives those traditions, that legacy, even greater significance, perhaps a greater sense of relevance in our daily life?
Look, I think so. It's a very organic movement. This one that's developing. We've not seen anything like it in our lifetime. And I think that gives people a connectedness that perhaps might not be there if we had a more traditional Anzac Day for individual people, walking out on the suburban street, marking it in the way that you wish to, however creative, I think gives people a sense of connectedness, a new connectedness and a different connectedness.
We often hear reference to the Anzac spirit, particularly in relation to significant natural disasters. We've had the summer of bushfires, and of course, currently we're faced with the pandemic, which has restricted people's lives. Do you feel that there is a sense that that Anzac spirit is something that people are drawing on, that people feel is even more important as we see, you know, the sorts of challenges that we continue to face?
Well, there have been many references back to World War I and World War II in this current crisis of the nation coming together, the nation moving as one in response to a once-in-a-century event like the one we're going through. And I think reflecting back on how communities have shown great resilience in moving forward is certainly prevalent and front of mind at the moment, and particularly on a day like today.
Professor Joy DeMusi with the Australian Catholic University, we do appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miriam. It's a pleasure.
There have been 12 new cases of coronavirus in New South Wales. 4 more people have tested positive at Newmarch Aged Care Home, bringing the total there to 48. An aged care worker at another facility has shown symptoms and tracing is underway.
There has been another worker in an aged care facility who has, within 48 hours of working, had some symptoms. Now, normally we would say in most situations that if it comes on within 24 hours we'd be concerned, but for particularly vulnerable populations such as aged care facilities, if someone has symptoms even within 48 hours, well, that is it's a trigger. It's a trigger for New South Wales Health and, of course, our federal government colleagues to implement what is necessary in terms of the tracing. I'd like at some point to be able to be open and transparent with the community about that particular facility, but at this stage I don't think it's appropriate to name the facility, having in mind that the families and the staff have yet to be notified. So, as I'm sure you all appreciate here, many of you have been to many of these conferences, this COVID-19 is very much it's a rolling situation, and we just happen to be at the point where the families at this point have not been notified, and nor other staff, so it's not appropriate to make that public, but we will.
Urgent parenting disputes involving children will be rushed through the courts in 72 hours as the coronavirus crisis puts pressure on already strained families. The Family Court and the Federal Circuit Courts will have a new process to deal with cases from the middle of next week. Political reporter Matthew Doran is in Parliament House and joins us now. Matthew, what has led to this announcement?
Miriam, good afternoon. The Family Court has seen an increase of 39% in urgent applications being made to it over the last month or so. The Federal Circuit Court, a similar increase in cases of around 23% as families struggle to cope with the coronavirus crisis, and in particular the restrictions that are being put on movement at the moment, adding some pressure to already strained relationships there. So the announcement that's been made today is that the courts, by the middle of next week, by next Wednesday, will have this new application process, effectively triaging cases to ensure that they are dealt with and allocated to judges within 72 hours. It builds on the fact that many of the courts are operating electronically at the moment, rather than having to physically hand in paperwork, having to physically show up to court. These processes will be dealt with online to try to bring about some sort of resolution for families as they are trying to deal with the very important matter of how to look after their children. The court's given a bit of guidance as to the sort of cases that could be fast-tracked here. They include cases where there is an increased risk of family violence as a result of those social restrictions being put in place. Also more logistical nightmares, such as some of the state borders that have been closed. If one parent is in New South Wales and another parent is is over in Queensland. The concern is that that requirement for people entering a state like Queensland or South Australia or WA to have to go into self-quarantine means that abiding by parenting orders, which might set out the way in which shared custody arrangements happen, are simply unfeasible throughout this crisis. So those are the sort of cases that could get fast-tracked, could get funneled through this system when it does become up and running by the middle of next week.
And Matthew, what sort of response have we heard so far?
Well, speaking to a few lawyers around the traps, they say that this is a welcome decision, that they have seen a increase in the number of new clients coming to them, trying to get urgent advice as to how they can deal with the breakdown of their relationships, and also existing clients who are saying that those parenting orders just aren't working at the moment, that they do need help in trying to fashion some sort of new agreement there. I've spoken to the Law Council of Australia today. The chair of their family law section, Paul Doolan, says that while there has been an increase in cases, he does also want to stress that a number of parents out there are being fairly realistic and pragmatic about the situation. They are trying to come to new arrangements within their family unit, not wanting to have to escalate the matter to courts, and understanding the fact that these are remarkable and unprecedented times and trying to make the best situation for their children there. The Law Council says that this does highlight the fact that, in their opinion, the Family Court and the Federal Circuit Court are woefully underfunded to do the work that they want or they need to do, and are called upon by families to step in and help sort out these family disputes, and saying that this situation, this new process, could reignite that debate about funding for the family law system.
Political reporter Matthew Doran there at Parliament House in Canberra. Overseas now, as the coronavirus death toll in the US rises above 50,000. A major maker of disinfectant has warned against injecting the product after the president suggested it could be used as a possible treatment for COVID-19. Health officials have also put out urgent warnings, but Donald Trump has gone on the defensive, saying he was being sarcastic. North America correspondent Catherine Diss reports.
This was an incredibly bizarre press conference yesterday. We heard from Bill Bryan at the Department of Homeland Security, who spoke about the work that his agency has been doing in regards to coronavirus, saying that they had found that heat and disinfectant had been highly effective in killing coronavirus particles on surfaces. That then led the US President Donald Trump to, on live television and seemingly on the fly, turn to his scientists on his coronavirus panel and suggest that they look into whether or not injecting disinfectant into coronavirus patients could be an effective form of treatment. And he also spoke about how they could use ultraviolet rays inside the body somehow to also as a form of treatment, after it was said that heat was highly effective in killing coronavirus. His tune today has drastically changed after a barrage of negative commentary from health officials around the world. His comments sparked a flurry of advisories from health authorities who warned to not take either of those actions. The Centres for Disease Control and Prevention, the country's leading public health authority here, has even issued safe guidelines over how to use household cleaning products, and that most certainly does not involve ingesting them. And we've also heard from one of the largest makers of disinfectant in the world, Reckitt Benckiser. It makes Dettol and Lysol. It has put out a statement saying under no circumstances should its products be ingested or injected into the body. Let's take a listen to what President Donald Trump had to say yesterday, side by side what he had to say today.
I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number of the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with, but it sounds interesting to me. No, I was asking a question sarcastically to reporters like you, just to see what would happen. But I was asking a very sarcastic question, to the reporters in the room about disinfectant on the inside. But it does kill it, and it would kill it on the hands, and that would make things much better. That was done in the form of a sarcastic question to the reporters.
In recent weeks, President Trump has spoken about hydroxychloroquine as being a potential game changer for treatment of coronavirus. It is a drug that has been long used to treat malaria and also autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis and lupus, but it has not yet been proven effective in treating COVID-19 in any sort of clinical sense. Some hospitals have started administering it as a last resort after the Food and Drug Administration granted doctors emergency powers to do so when there were few other options on the table for saving a patient. We've seen some clinical studies start within hospitals, and patients in some cases have been reacting adversely. In Brazil and France, they started clinical trials. They've now called them off after also having some negative results. Some Swedish hospitals are warning against its use, and even this week, the Department of Veterans Affairs here released its results from an observational study which found that the death rate was much higher among those who were given it than those who were given standard hospital care.
Antarctica is the only place Australians are able to gather today to mark Anzac Day. The Australian stations are COVID-19 free, meaning social distancing restrictions aren't being implemented. Expeditioners on the frozen continent are taking part in dawn services in the traditional way, side by side. Director of the Australian Antarctic Division, Kim Ellis, says the team has a strong connection with the Anzac spirit.
The Anzac Day celebrations this year on our Antarctic stations are particularly special.
There are 89 Australians at Casey, Mawson, Davis and Macquarie Island research stations paying their respects with handmade flagpoles, wreaths and two-up paddles. The top stories on ABC News. Australians are commemorating Anzac Day at home this year with public services and marches cancelled due to coronavirus restrictions. Small ceremonies are being held across the country. It's the first time since 1919 Anzac Day commemorations have been disrupted. People gathered on their driveways, balconies and on their porches to light up the dawn. RSLs have asked Australians to take a moment to pay their respects during the day. This morning's national commemorative service has been watched by thousands of people broadcast from the Australian War Memorial. The coronavirus death toll in the US has surpassed 50,000 according to data from Johns Hopkins University. The country has by far the highest death toll in the world and the number of confirmed infections is approaching 900,000. Donald Trump has signed a fourth relief package into law worth $750 billion. And there have been 12 new cases of coronavirus in New South Wales. 4 more people have tested positive at Newmarch Aged Care Facility in Sydney, bringing the total of COVID-19 cases there to 48. 4,840 tests have been carried out in the state in the past day. Adelaide held a closed dawn service at the War Memorial today with around 20 guests representing the community. There was also a small service at the Repatriation Hospital. Helen Frost joins us now from the hospital. So Helen, you attended the Adelaide War Memorial this morning. What was it like there?
Even just driving in before dawn, we saw so many people outside on their driveways lighting up the dawn. And then when we arrived, it was quite an eerie feeling because there were only about 10 people attending and then maybe another 10 involved in the actual service itself. So we had a bugler play the last post. We also had soldiers with one drum, and it was a very muted tone for Anzac Day, but it very much honoured the spirit of Anzac Day. So what we're seeing now is a lot of people are coming to pay their respects after the service in different ways. So we saw a vicar here just a few minutes ago who was singing while she was playing a song on her phone. We've seen other veterans come down wearing their medals, laying their own wreaths and then saying prayers. So it has been a very different type of Anzac Day, but definitely one that has still honoured the fallen. Everybody stood apart this morning. We had everyone a couple of square metres away. We saw our Premier Stephen Marshall, he was here, the opposition leader Peter Malinauskas, and we also had Federal Labor MP Penny Wong. So they laid wreaths on behalf of the community, and we also saw representatives from different armed forces as well as the police pay their respects and lay their wreaths as well.
And Helen, has it also been a very different type of Anzac Day there at the repatriation hospital?
Yeah, so what we've seen is usually at the repat, the original site of the Army Hospital where the diggers used to come after different battles from across the country, so particularly from the Battle of Darwin, they used to come down to the repat, and it's a 270-bed hospital, and they used to have up to 1,000 patients inside at once, so people used to line the halls. It is a place that's very special to a lot of the veterans here in South Australia because of that, and the chapel is somewhere where they often sit and grieve when they want to. They're always allowed access in there, and this morning not being able to go in was hard for them on Anzac Day. And we heard from Bill Denny, he's the RSL SA ambassador, and he was saying that it's very important today for people who know veterans to check on them and make sure that they're okay. We heard from 99-year-old Les Brown. He is the only digger in South Australia from World War II that actually attended a service this morning, and he always gives the ode at the repat, and he said it was an honour for him to do that. This is what he had to say earlier.
This day is very important to me because it makes me remember of my battalion. It started at Darwin. At the present day, only 4 remain of us, of 1,200 that left Warradale in 1941. I think of them every Anzac Day.
Les told me after the service that he was very grateful that people were interested in his story and interested to still watch the service and the dawn services that are being broadcast, because it means so much to him and his community, because it's a very important day for them, and they hope that they'll be back out next year able to march at the service. There's only 3 of them left in his battalion, and he'll be 100 next year, but he's really hoping that he'll be there to lead them on again.
Evidence, our reporter Helen Frost there at the Repatriation Hospital in Adelaide. Let's go now to Perth, where residents have been marking Anzac Day from their homes. Reporter Joanna Mena joins us now. So Joanna, just how have people there been marking Anzac Day?
Well, just as it has been across the nation, very, very differently. Normally the streets behind me would be packed with thousands of people clapping and cheering veterans and current serving members of the Defence Force. But as you can see, the streets are empty. The only reference to Anzac Day are the banners that are flying in the middle of the road. That's because all services in Western Australia were cancelled. That included the dawn service at Kings Park, which is usually attended by tens of thousands of people. Last year there were 30,000 people there. But this year there was only a handful of people at the War Memorial to watch the sunrise over Perth. That included a number of police officers who were there just to make sure that there were no illegal large gatherings. But certainly different scenes from what we've seen in the years previous.
And Joanna, West Australians, have they answered that call to mark Anzac Day from their homes, and how have they been doing that?
Yes, they did. Thousands of people came to the end of their driveways or their balconies or their porches to take a moment to remember the fallen. They included retired Army Lance Corporal David Scott. He's a bugler. He's also one of the recipients of the Anzac of the Year award this year. Now, he played the last post at his retirement village in Manoora. He's played at services before at Gallipoli and Villas Bretonner, but he certainly insisted that he wanted to do it today because he said this performance is just as important as the others.
It's hard to explain. My grandfather fought on the Western Front, and it's just a great opportunity to to say thank you to those sort of people, people that have been before us and prepared to put their life on the line for us. I don't think we'd be doing this today if they hadn't.
David Scott, just like every other West Australian and every other Australian across the country, will be hoping that the crowds will be back next year and that the Anzac services we know will be back to normal for next year.
This Anzac Day, thousands of people have marked solemn observances at dawn despite the physical distancing restrictions. Jeremy Fernandez has been collecting some of the many images people have been sending us and posting online.
Miriam, it's been really very uplifting to see just how the nation has honoured those who've served and fallen in war and peace. The colours at dawn are always spectacular and especially meaningful on a day such as today. This photo is from David and Sandy Rafferty, marking a moment's silence with Pauline Davies in the early hours of the morning. Actually, this one is from Astralat Street, actually, in Brisbane, where Nicola Bignell was playing the trumpet to mark Anzac Day dawn over their street. These photos coming to us from Christopher Gillett. And let's take a look at what dawn looked like at the Burry-McCallum family home in Darwin. Candles in the early morning light as they took a moment to salute those who've served. Melissa, thank you for sending your picture in. We can't seem to get that up for some reason, but we'll try to a bit later on. Let's move on to a picture from Winton in central Queensland. Rosie Archer, the wife of the late John Archer, is in her yard just after dawn. Lest we forget was the sign that was displayed on her front yard. We're having a bit of trouble getting those pictures up. If I'm not mistaken, though, she was standing in front of some poppies that were knitted. We've seen that around the country, knitted poppies made by women, particularly in churches, adorning some of these places where you would normally find wreaths on Anzac Day. We had another beautiful image from Jared Goff at Dunlop in the ACT, a salute at dawn light with candles laid along a residential street with the words, "Lest we forget," inscribed on the curb. Electra Sheridan's mum was up early this morning with two friends setting up for a memorial on the driveway. Like so many people, getting out onto the driveways, keeping that social distance, lighting a candle and taking a moment to remember, Mim, those who've fallen and those who've served in war and in peace.
Jeremy, yes, thank you very much. It's a shame we couldn't see all of those images, but it's wonderful to see so many efforts being made across the country.
Thanks, Miriam.
Thank you, Jeremy. Well, not everyone has been on their driveways, especially for those with friends and family far away. We have been seeing also people turning to to commemorations in other places around the country. We've also had Aaron Pegram, who is a senior historian at the Australian War Memorial, saying that technology has allowed more people to share in the Anzac Day from their homes.
This is uncharted times for in recent times, indeed, from the ways in which Australians have been used to commemorating Anzac Day on the 25th of April each year. Of course, we have endured similar episodes like this. Of course, we've been talking about the flu pandemic in 1919, but that was certainly before Anzac Day traditions had been firmly cemented in Australian society like they have been over the past 100 years. There was a very small and solemn commemorative ceremony this morning at the Australian War Memorial at 5:30 a.m. and that included the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition and a very few dignitaries, which was broadcast live on the ABC all across Australia. Of course, Australians then paused in their own homes at 6 a.m. Many thousands reflected on. They observed a minute silence in their driveways all across the nation, which roughly translated to that time when the last post and the ode is being recited at the Australian War Memorial. So indeed, this is the first real time in which we've really sort of had to depend on the digital means to observe Anzac Day, and it's been quite a success throughout the morning. I think this is a new chapter in the history of Anzac Day, which has its form and function and ceremony, and it has many of the traditions that we observe every year. But let's remember too that Anzac Day has always chopped and changed throughout the years. Popularity has waxed and wanes over the years. It was established by the generation who'd fought in the First World War, and for them it was their day. Initially, it was the veterans who had served on Gallipoli, but those who had also served more broadly during the First World War. And then by the 1940s, 1940s, it then came to include the next generation, their modern generation of veterans, which of course had served during the Second World War. Popularity did taper off towards in the late 70s and 1980s, and it certainly wasn't until the mid-1990s, around the 50th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, that we saw a resurgence of interest in Anzac Day and those public commemorative rituals. And then the First World War centenary itself. Of course, by then we had no more First World War veterans left with us. And then we saw more and more Australians commemorating Anzac Day, even though those First World War generation were no longer there, to the point where in 2015 at the Australian War Memorial, we had close to 150,000 people turning out to observe Anzac Day. So I think this is just a new challenge in a new chapter, I should say, in how Australians have observed and marked Anzac Day throughout the years. And of course, with an increasing reliance on digital means through social media and the internet, live broadcasts such as that of the ABC, to help communicate that message to the lounge rooms and of ordinary Australians across the country.
There are more than 2,000 Australian Defence Force personnel deployed on operations across the globe. Here are some of their Anzac messages.
I'm leading Aircraftswoman Madison Moses, and I'm a communicator in the Royal Australian Air Force. This Anzac Day, I'm posted on HMAS Toowoomba in the Middle East region. On Anzac Day, I'll take time to reflect on the servicemen and women of Australia and the sacrifices they've made for our country. I'll also take time to reflect on my great-grandfather's service during the Korean War in the Navy, and my mother's service on International Force East Timor. I also just want to say shout out to my partner Jared and my family back home in Australia, and I can't wait to see you guys soon.
Anzac Day to me is a day for the nation to pause and remember the sacrifice of all those Australians and New Zealanders in all current, past and future conflicts.
G'day, my name is Corporal Vikrant Devkar. I'm here in the Middle East. Big shout out to my family back in Brisbane, my missus and my son. Vidhan, make sure you play cricket on Anzac Day and enjoy your day. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Corporal Nikki Weinheimer. I'm currently here in the Middle East. I'll be here for Anzac Day. I hope everyone back home has a good and safe Anzac Day, as well as my parents and my other half Jack and my dog Dennis.
Anzac Day for me is remembering servicemen and women of the past who have come and gone, in particular my grandfather who served at Milne Bay during World War II as a medic and surgeon's assistant.
G'day, how you going? I'm Sub Lieutenant Irwin on board HMAS Toowoomba. This Anzac Day will be in the Middle East region, deployed on Op Manitow. What Anzac Day means is remembering those serving currently and have served before us. Big shout out to our support services offshore and our support services back home. And finally, to our friends and family. Stay safe, stay isolated, stay healthy.
Usually at this time of year, war medals are polished, uniforms pressed, and the grounds of local cenotaphs host Anzac Day services and parades. This year, because of coronavirus, Anzac Day gatherings have been called off. A community on the New South Wales North Coast has stepped up to make sure one local veteran doesn't miss out.
Do you need some help? Put your tie on. There you go.
Meet Henry Corky Caldwell, a World War II veteran who last month turned 100 years old.
Do it up.
This year's Anzac Day was shaping up to be a very special one for Corky until the Australian government cancelled all parades and gatherings because of COVID-19.
It's very important.
There you go. Put the strap under.
I've been going to, ever since the war finished, I've been going to Anzac Day ceremonies. We used to start off about 4 o'clock in the morning and go through till 10 or 11 o'clock at night. I know we used to get into trouble from the wives. So paying up all day.
It means a lot. He looks forward to Anzac Day every year, almost more than anything else. He likes to do his march. He likes to lay his wreath on behalf of his brothers. All his granddaughters, grandsons come from Sydney, Newcastle, Brisbane to celebrate with him. So he was fairly gutted when Anzac Day wasn't going to happen this year. Beautiful.
Suzanne shared Corky's disappointment in a post on Facebook.
Within a day, I had about 500 replies, and within 2 days, I had 2,500 replies. So since then, Dad's received many, many, many cards from people all over Australia thanking him for his service, stating how gutted they all are on behalf of Dad and what could they do.
One of the people who responded to the Facebook post is Phil Heesh. He owns a World War II Jeep.
A mate of mine in Wollongong, via another mate in Darwin, believe it or not, rang me and said that there was a very disappointed old digger in Grafton that wanted to ride in a Jeep because Anzac Day was cancelled. Turns out that it's the same guy, Corky, that I take every year in our parade in Grafton.
Phil has offered to take Corky down memory lane in his own Anzac road trip. Corky enlisted in 1941 when he was 21 years old.
All the Australian troops were going away and I thought that was the thing to do.
An auto-electrician by trade, he was assigned to an army unit of engineers, and within a month he was shipped out to the Middle East and stationed in an ordnance workshop behind the lines.
We were working about 18 hours a day on ambulances, and some of the tanks had been hit, and I still had pieces of people in where we had to clean them out and get them out ready.
Between battles, Corky, armed with his box brownie, captured the exotic world around him.
Oh yeah, I got dozens and dozens of photos here of all the pyramids and well, I climbed up the first one and used to ride camels around them, and it was a homing place for the troops. All go out to see the Sphinx. Yeah, I got a lot of photos in there.
Towards the end of the war, Corky was stationed in Darwin and started writing letters to a high school girlfriend. 2 years after he came home, Gloria and Corky became husband and wife.
Yeah, it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
The end of the war was not the end of Corky's service to his community. He became a serial volunteer.
Oh, well, I joined the Fire Brigade in Grafton. I was 35 years in that. Then Corowa Shire asked me to take over the bushfire brigades. I had 15 years or so running the bushfire brigade. I was in every organisation around the place. I was a life member of the Show Society. I coached some of the high school hockey teams that I knew nothing about.
In 75 years, Corky has never missed an Anzac Day, and while this one is early, he will get his moment at the cenotaph.
Thank you. Lest we forget. It sort of gets you a bit when you go out to the cenotaph, and I lay a wreath for my brothers, and that gets you a bit.
He did, I think, morph into Anzac mode because, you know, he was remembering his brothers, his wife, who's just passed away, and all his mates from the war. Oh, I think it was very special. Yep, I do. I think he had a wonderful day. Wonderful day.
Overseas again, a 99-year-old British Army veteran has become the oldest person in the UK to reach #1 on the British singles charts. Captain Tom Moore was featured along with a choir of health workers and theatre star Michael Ball in a version of You'll Never Walk Alone to raise money for the National Health Service. Captain Moore has already raised more than $55 million and says despite the pandemic, things will get better. Checking the satellite image, a cloud band streaming across south-western Australia is bringing light rain and isolated thunderstorms. A trough and front clearing over the southeast is generating showers over Tasmania. High-pressure systems across the country will see widespread warm and dry conditions. Looking around the country for today, Queensland, mostly sunny, warmer conditions in the west. Clear and warm in New South Wales and the ACT, windy on the Alps and fog for the southeast. In Victoria, mostly cloudy in the south, warm and sunny in the north. To Tasmania, mostly forecast and some showers in the southwest, windy in the highlands. Mostly cloudy for South Australia, a late shower in the central region, warm and hot in the north. For WA, showers in the southwest and mostly sunny and warm in the north. And mostly sunny and hot across the top end, a high of 35 for Darwin. And we leave you now with a moment from dawn this morning in Mount Gambier in South Australia, where renowned trumpeter James Morrison played the last post from his driveway.
This is an historic day.
Prime Minister told Parliament that
This justifies the entire deck.
What else you hiding here?
You think Matt's behind that murder?
You're the one doing all the talking.
He lays his sins bare so you can see them.
Mystery Road continues tomorrow 8:30, ABC and iView. Coronavirus is changing the way we live, work and communicate. Changes can be hard, so it's vital to take care of ourselves and others. Prioritising your mental health is important. To help, there are some things you can do, like eating well, keeping active, talking with family, friends and neighbours via phone or video calls, and making a new daily routine. Together, we can help stop the spread and stay healthy. Visit australia.gov.au to learn more. Authorised by the Australian Government, Canberra.
Waiting for you is the person that you were always meant to be.
The best entertainment is yours to stream free on iView.
Come on in, people.
Collections of the biggest titles.
With complete series of dramas,
comedies,
docos,